Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Way too early. Spring transfer portal targets for this Oregon Ducks program. And, we're going to say spring transfer portal targets. This is a little bit more of a conversation of, hey, let's look at this Oregon roster heading into spring practice. Where on this Oregon roster might we want to see Oregon go out and address in the transfer portal after that spring practice session? Now, this conversation is going to change a lot, after what we see in the spring game, after what we read from the spring practice window. We'll kind of have a better feeling of where this Oregon Ducks roster sits. But I think the whole goal for Dan Lanning in Oregon is, hey, how can we, for lack of better terms, find that 1%? This is a top 5 team in the country heading into 2025. There's no secret about it. National championship caliber. What positions might we need to address to put us over the hump in the 2025 year? That's the conversation I want to get into. Before we do, and as always, I think the best part about doing this is just hearing from the Oregon fans in the comment section. You look at this projected depth chart, so to speak, and say, hey, where on this roster would you like to see Oregon try to get better in heading into 2025? Let it fly in the comment section. We got some positions to talk about. We got some players to talk about as well. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's start with what Oregon's process or strategy, you might say, has been in the transfer portal up until this point, and that is the number might not be as high, right? We've seen Oregon go out and land, a lot of names in the transfer portal over the last 2 years. The number's a little bit lower. The quality of player significantly higher. It's pretty clear that Oregon does not want to grab guys in the transfer portal just to grab them. We're going to try to be landing guys that, one, fit our football team, and then two, can be legitimate difference makers for us in 2025. And I mean, you go back to last year's spring transfer portal window, landing a guy like Derek Carmen, that changed the game for Oregon on the defensive side of the football. The number's not going to be that big in the spring transfer portal window, but can you find players like Derek Carmen that can fundamentally change your football team? The other thing I would point out is, really like Dan Lanning's strategy in terms of building around Dante Moore. There was a lot of conversation about Oregon going out into the transfer portal and grabbing a quarterback. I don't think that was ever the plan for this Oregon offense. I think Dan Lanning said, hey, we won like Dante Moore. I think they really like Austin Nova said too. We like the quarterbacks that are in our room. We think these quarterbacks are better than most of the transfer portal quarterbacks that you saw available. Instead of wasting so much time and resources going out and grabbing a quarterback, let's go make sure that everywhere around this Oregon offense, around the quarterback position, is top notch. And that's what Oregon did, right? They completely retooled the offensive line, landing legit 3 of the best offensive linemen that you saw in the transfer portal. That's a big deal for Oregon going into 2025. Now, looking at where this Oregon offense is right now, where they're going into spring practice, I think the first position you might want to look at is the wide receiver spot. Now, retaining Evan Stewart, keeping him out of the NFL draft, that's just about as good as any wide receiver transfer portal addition you could have made. You land a guy like Malik Benson, who to me is kind of that lottery ticket. He could either really work out for Oregon, but he also just might not be. He might be a non-factor. He's one of those really intriguing guys to keep an eye out in spring practice. He's got some big-time physical traits, 6'1", 200, 10'4" in the 100-meter dash. We like what's under the hood here. Can he figure it out in this Oregon offense? Now, why I mentioned the wide receiver position is you still have to replace, Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden. And as we sit right now, there's largely only 1 or 2 proving commodities at the college football level in this Oregon wide receiver room. That's Evan Stewart, and you could say maybe Gary Bryant or Justice Lowe. Does Oregon want to go out and land one more of those kind of guys is probably the conversation. And then the second conversation is, what kind of wide receiver do we want to go land? My inclination here is Evan Stewart, DeCorian Moore, guy like Jeremiah McClellan, potentially Jerion Dickey, Malik Benson. I look at the big boundary wide receivers for Oregon and say feel really good about what that position is. And y'all know how I feel about Decory Moore. He is, to me, an immediate impact maker for this Oregon offense. What kind of wide receiver might Oregon want to address? It's maybe that, Tez Johnson slot wide receiver. Gary Bryant Jr., I think a lot of Oregon fans really like, and rightfully so, but it hasn't necessarily been the most consistent, especially in the 2024 year, working through some injuries. And Justice Lowe, I think, showed some good things, but can he be that legitimate difference maker in this Oregon offense that Tez Johnson was? The jury's still out on that. One name that, it's kind of funny because every Oregon fan and like college football fan that follows the transfer portal rumors, what they were talking about Carnell Tate from Ohio State. The name that intrigues me more is Brandon Inniss, right? Brandon Inniss, a former 5-star coming out of high school, bona fide slot wide receiver that is elite running routes and creating separation, really good after the catch. That to me is a better fit. You bring in Carnell Tate and you put him in this wide receiver room with guys like Evan Stewart and guys like Decory Moore. I don't know if that's where Oregon needs the most help. I look at that slot wide receiver position, a guy that can create separation, be dynamic after the catch, those two things that Tez Johnson really brought to Oregon's offense. To me, Brandon Inniss would make more sense for this Oregon Ducks offense. And again, the wide receiver position is probably just a little bit of a wait and see mode, right? Hey, what does Jeremiah McClellan look like? What does Decory Moore look like? What does Jurion Dickey look like? You got a lot of young talent that is coming up through the pipeline. I think that's the reason Oregon didn't go out to the transfer portal in the winter and spend a ton on a wide receiver, because I think there's a lot of confidence that some of those young wide receivers can step up. The rest of the offense, I think you feel pretty good. The biggest win for Oregon is completely revamping this offensive line, where I didn't have this on my bingo card that Oregon's offensive line was going to be better than it was in 2024. Very well might. Isaiah World is, I believe, the number one prospect in the transfer portal after the updated rankings. So it's hard to find a starting caliber tackle in the transfer portal. Oregon found the best one. And Alex Harkey, not too far behind Isaiah World. One thing that I don't know if Oregon will be able to get done, but I wouldn't mind seeing them try, is maybe some depth at tackle. But outside of that, you look at this Oregon offense and say we're sitting pretty good. Maybe add an elite difference maker at wide receiver, but outside of that, we feel good about this Oregon offense. Going to the defense, a couple of positions that you might be looking at here. I think it starts probably at the linebacker position, where you saw Oregon try to go and kick around some linebackers. Didn't really work out. And I think one of the things is just that there weren't that many good off-ball linebackers that were available in the transfer portal. And look, you feel good about Bryce Betcher coming back. You feel good about Devin Jackson coming back. I love Braden Platt going into year 2. That was the position that seemed like kind of held Oregon back a little bit. Oregon was elite at a lot of different spots. Were they elite at off-ball linebacker? No, probably not. And you saw Ohio State in that Rose Bowl game, for lack of better terms, kind of attack the athleticism of the off-ball linebacker position for Oregon. Forcing these linebackers to go play out in space with some elite caliber skill against Ohio State, and Oregon really, really couldn't. One name that I would kick around because kind of two different reasons. One, Dan Lanning knows this kid really well. And again, we have to wait for these kids to enter into the transfer portal, but I'm just putting out some names that I think might find themselves in the portal, because you look at Justin Williams and say, this kid's awesome. Former 5-star in the 2024 class, did not play a ton for Georgia as a freshman. I don't know how much he's going to play in 2025 either, because Georgia's got their 2 starting linebackers coming back in 2025. Is Justin Williams going through spring practice and saying, hey, maybe I'm not having as much opportunities I would like going into year 2. Maybe I'll go see what the other opportunities are. If you see a guy like Justin Williams hit the portal, you jump on it. And Dan Lanning recruited him when he was at Georgia, and then recruited him when he was the head coach of Oregon. That relationship between Dan Lanning and Justin Williams is really, really strong. This is the kind of linebacker that Oregon needs to start getting on the high school trail. This Justin Williams, a sub 1,100 meter dash guy. He's one of the fastest linebackers that you see in the country. We need these kind of linebackers, because when you want to beat teams like Ohio State or like a team like Texas, when you get into the college football playoffs, you need speed at that linebacker position. Justin Williams has lots of it. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be Justin Williams, but is there an off-ball linebacker that comes available in the spring transfer portal window that provides that elite athleticism? That's probably what you're looking at. And the last position that you might be looking at, and this is kind of similar to the wide receiver spot that to me, it's like a wait and see. What does Aiden Breland look like going into year two? Or a guy like Jericho Johnson, or a guy like Tyone Gray. Oregon recruited a lot of really good defensive linemen in that 2024 class that were not necessarily huge factors as freshmen in 2024, but very well could be in 2025 if the development from a guy like Jericho Johnson or from a guy like Aiden Breland or Tyone Gray is not necessarily what we thought it was going to be. This is probably another position you want to address. And again, I go back to Derek Carman 12 months ago. When Oregon landed Derek Carman in that spring transfer portal window, that fundamentally changed Oregon's defense in 2024, made it a significantly better unit. If one of those kind of names becomes available, can you go and grab them? That would be another position. And one name that I kind of look at is David Custa. I mean, he's from California. He went to Kentucky after transferring from Washington State. We'll see if what happened. We saw a lot of guys commit to one school last year, go through spring practice, hit the transfer portal again. We'll see if that happens with a guy like David Custa. You look at the secondary and say, I don't know how Oregon can go even fit another transfer portal addition. Like it's such a loaded unit to me going into 2025, where you had that, for lack of better terms, probably glaring hole at the safety spot. You go and land the best safety in the class, in the transfer portal class. You have Trey McNutt coming in as a freshman. You got Peyton Woodard, Aaron Flowers, and Kingston Lopa coming into year two. I don't even know if you could convince a guy in the secondary to come to Oregon because it's so hard to get on the football field here. This is the most competitive room, one of the most competitive rooms that you see in the country, this Oregon secondary spot. There's not a ton of positions Oregon needs to address, if any. The whole goal is you go through spring practice, say, all right, where's that one position that can maybe change the game for us in 2025? And that's going to be the conversation for Oregon over the next 5 to 10 years, however long Dan Lanning's here, is, hey, we got national championship caliber roster every single year. What are those one or two additions that we can grab in the portal that can maybe put us over the top? Would love to hear from you guys. To me, it's potentially wide receiver, for sure off-ball linebacker, and maybe on the defensive line. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, way too early. We're going to update this conversation as spring practice plays out and as we actually find out the names that will be in the transfer portal. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.